Hi. All right. It's Monday, 7 p.m. Get in here and be on time, right? So it is Monday, Career Catalyst Live Day. And if you are joining for the first time, I'm Angela M. Zachary, owner of the Inside Track Career Services. And what I do is quite simple. I help job seekers simplify their job searches. I believe it should be simple. I don't believe in spray and pray when it comes to applying for jobs. I believe in using strategies based on insider knowledge that I have as an HR professional. All right, so this week's topic, let me know if you're seeing me live and if you're seeing me on the replay um, because sometimes Facebook decides not to let me go live. So we'll see what happens today. But the topic we're talking about is really important, and I'm glad I'm talking about this today because earlier today I went to my son's parent-teacher conference. I have a 5-year-old, and yes, they do those even in kindergarten. And it was so interesting to learn about my child's skill development and with those things in mind when it comes to careers, how important it is to be able to demonstrate skills, specifically when you're job searching. So this week I want to talk about skills. What is skills-based hiring and how it works for job seekers, and the things that you need to know that are probably going to be completely different from what you've seen online about skills-based hiring. So let's jump in. So, what is skills-based hiring? Skills-based hiring is hiring that is based on skills. Again, very simple, right? But there's a lot that goes into it. So, it's when employers have processes in place or preferences already in place that allow them to select employees or select candidates based on skills that they have, not necessarily other factors like degrees, right? And we all know throughout time, degrees have been preferred because of the assumed knowledge that comes with it, the assumed skills that come with a degree. We all assume that a person who has a degree has teamwork skills, even though if you've ever worked anywhere, you know that's probably not true. We assume that they have reasoning skills and writing skills, which also often is not true. So, skills-based hiring is kind of a deviation from that, allowing companies to focus on skills more than they focus on degrees. But there are a lot of misconceptions around skills-based hiring. I'm only going to touch on three, but there are a lot. So the first misconception is that skills-based hiring replaces the degree. Okay, so meaning if I have the skills, the employer won't care whether or not I have a degree. And that actually is not true. In most cases, the employer will prefer someone who has a relevant degree because it's called skills based hiring, not skills exclusive. They're not saying they don't care if you don't have a degree. Some employers don't. Some employers, especially for certain jobs where skills are going to be the crux of that role, some employers don't care if you whether you have a degree or not. But the majority of employers do still care. And I'll say this, even in companies that say that they are adopting skills-based hiring practices, a lot of them have not actually changed their practice and their system in order to make that possible. So they're still requiring degrees for almost all their jobs. They're still preferring people who have a degree. They're still comparing a person without a degree to another person who has a degree. So in a lot of cases, skills-based hiring is just a name. It's not actually in practice for many employers. And that's important for you to know if you are banking on skills-based hiring to get you a job, right? Because like I said, it's not skills exclusive. So and there's no requirement for employers to hire you just because you have the skills that they've asked for, right? They don't have to do that. And so they very likely can still choose the candidate who has the degree that they're looking for, even if you are objectively similar, or when I say objectively similar, I mean you have the same skills, maybe the same years of experience. Maybe you can have an identical background, right? But if the one person has a degree and the other does not, employers are more likely to choose the one who has a degree, partially because of those old norms that we have, but also because employers tend to prefer someone with a degree. Like, think about if you're working in a technical field and your job hires somebody who has a high school diploma and you have an advanced degree, are you more likely to feel a way about that or say, oh, no, it's fine, they have the skills? In some fields, that is the case, but in the majority of fields, it is not. Because, say, like an accountant, and in some fields, like, you can't get very far in the field without the degree. But that's not going to work for every field. Like I said, there are some that do, but they are few compared to the ones that will require a degree. All right, so that's number one. It does not replace degrees. They still care about that. Number two, skills-based hiring is just about having skills on your resume. I've seen people just dump skills on their resume. I can do that. I can do that. I can do that. And nowhere in the resume is there proof. So a skill that you can't prove through actual experience, that's an aspiration. Like, I could say I can play guitar. No, I am practicing playing guitar, but I would not call that one of my skills. I aspire to have that skill, right? And I'll be honest, if you're in the aspiration stage when you're applying for a job, you should not be applying. You should not be at the application stage and the aspiration stage at the same time, right? Aspiration means you've still got some work to do to get to that level. That's not to say that a career ladder is not for you, because that implies that you have enough skills to do the next job at at whatever level. But if it's aspirational, meaning you don't have those skills, that is probably not the job for you to apply for. And I mean essential skills, okay? And we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, every skill you list on your resume has to have a witness. It has to have a bullet point in your impactful statements that witnesses to that skill. If I say that I am skilled at management, then I need to have something in that resume that points to my management skills. If I say I am skilled at analysis, there needs to be something in my resume that points to that analysis. And if these are important skills for this employer or for this job, even more important that I have those skills baked into my resume. Okay, so remember this: a skill you cannot prove is an aspiration, and ain't nobody got time for that. Be very honest with you. All right, so misconception number three: soft skills matter as much as hard skills. I see that all the time, not in those exact words, but it's something folks say when they just don't have the hard skills. It's something some career coaches say when their client just does not have the hard skills, that the soft skills matter as much. They matter as well, but they do not matter as much as hard skills. There's no director of soft skills job. There's no associate of soft skills job. That does not exist. You've got directors of accounting, you've got directors of uh, what else? Logistics. You've got all kinds of roles, but none of them depend on soft skills. Do you need them? Yes, they should complement the hard skills that you have, but skills-based hiring is not going to help you get a director role just because you are good with people. That's not how hiring works. That's not how jobs work. And we've all worked with somebody who did not have the skills we thought they should have. So if we all know that, we definitely should not assume that soft skills are what skills-based hiring is based on. It's not. So get the hard skills, complement those with soft skills, okay? And then you'll be in a better position than if you were just trying to get your soft skills to carry you, because they won't. All right, so those are the top three. And like I said, there are a whole lot more, but those are my top three. Those are the ones that I, every time I see somebody talk about skills-based hiring, it makes me itch, right? So the second thing I want to talk about is how to identify the stated and unstated skills that employers are looking for. And before I even get into this, if you don't have the essential skills on the job description, like I said a bit before, you don't need to apply for that job. And that's especially true, if you're a career changer, because you have to rely so heavily on those skills, right? But if you don't have those essential skills, you're not ready to apply for that job. I really don't care what anyone tells you about that. You need to have skills in order for an employer to believe you can do the job, right? So if you don't have those yet, that's fine. Go back to the drawing board, go back and learn those skills. But for essential skills, meaning if I am a writer and I don't know how to write, I'm not gonna get that job, right? If I'm an accountant, which I could not be ever because I don't like accounting and I find it very stressful, I don't have those skills. So I can't get that accounting job, right? So if you don't have the essential skills for the job, even if you have some of the other skills, and I'm about to talk about that, then you need to gain those skills first, okay? So in my government days, we would kind of break up skills in our job descriptions into two categories: essential skills and or essential duties and May duties, right? May duties are, I guess, maybe not what it sounds like, but these are duties that you may perform, right? We're putting it on there so you know it could come up, but it's not essential, meaning if you never do that duty, it does not change your job. It's just something that might be assigned based on your job, right? Based on the nature of your job. Um, Essential duties were duties that the majority of people in that job are going to perform no matter what. Excuse me. And so the way that that would always be set up was essential duties are going to be at the top always because these are the ones we want you to pay attention to. Those are the ones we care about, right? And then the May duties would be toward the end. And so for a lot of employers, just thinking about how folks think, we are writing the things that are most important to us first, right? And then we talk about the ones that we want or we might need, but they aren't as essential, right? So they're not as important. The ones at the top of that job description are going to be the ones they care about the most. It's just human nature. It's just human thinking. Even if they don't call it essential and May duties, those are going to be the ones they care about the most. So that is one way to figure out what's an essential skill and what isn't. It's where it lines up in the job description. Okay. And then most employers still use, I'm not even gonna say most, employers use a section in their job descriptions called required or qualifications, essential, something like that. And they're gonna often have a preferred section. So required qualifications, minimum qualifications, something with that terminology. That's going to be the skills that you must have to do the job. So they're not gonna look your way. And if they have it set up in ATS, it's gonna just ignore you or rank you in a certain way. If they have a panel that is ranking candidates, they will rank you lower if you don't have these skills or decide not to pursue a conversation with you at all because these are essential to them. They've decided that you have to have these skills no matter who you are, no matter how much experience or how many years of experience you have. You've got to have these skills. Okay. And you can probably think about, even in your field, what are the must have skills. For a lot of us, um, people skills are not must haves. Like you must have them to get through it. But do you need it to do the job? Not always, not most of the time. So think about, even in your own job, what are those must have skills? And then there are preferred skills where an employer might say, we don't need every person who does this job to have this skill. Maybe most of our existing team don't even have this skill, but it's one that we want. This could be because they have a project that has a skill gap in it. Could be because their team is falling short in a certain area, or maybe don't have someone with deep skill in that area. And so they are saying preferred because that's what they really want. And that's how you become kind of the apple of their eye in your process. Because when you have those preferred skills, they start to look at you more closely. They like everybody, when you're thinking about dating, you have must have or deal breakers, and then there are nice to have things, right? So an employer is going to prefer those nice to have things when you already have all the other must haves. Okay. So that's another way you can figure out the skills, and that's explicit, right? They're stating this is what they need. And then there are unstated skills. That could be soft skills, like I said. If you want to be a manager, yes, they'll probably say you need to be skilled at management, right? You need to be able to manage teams. But they might not say you need to be skilled at counseling your team. Does that mean you don't need to? No, because you're a manager, right? So there are going to be skills or administrative skills. They're not going to necessarily say that, but as a manager, you need that. So thinking about what is the skill they stated, what is the job, what is the level of this job, and then either think about that on your own, or yeah, you can use the internet. You can use ChatGPT. Say, what are the skills that I need to do this role? Because they're not going to state all the skills you're going to need. They're not writing down every day in the life of a person in this job on that job description. That's not the point of a job description, right? But if there are skills stated, you can guarantee that there are going to be some skills that are unstated. And so once you can pull those out as well, figure out what those are, you're in a much better position to be able to present yourself, because they're going to say, oh, they have this other skill too. And I didn't even ask for that. Wow, that's amazing. They love it when you give them more, right? They love it when you come to the table with more than what they had asked for. And so those unstated skills are important. And just not a caveat, but an additional or an aside, if you are working in this field already, to an extent, you should know what those unstated skills would be. And that's if you're already working in the field, because I can think of a lot of jobs I've looked at where the stated skills were not all that it took to do the job. And so if you're already in that field, you should know to a certain extent what those skills would be, right? Because you've been in the job before. You're aware and well versed in that environment. So you should be able to do that. And then lastly, how do you validate your skills? Well, first, you validate your skills using your real life experience, because like I said, if you don't have the proof, it doesn't exist. One of my coworkers said that one time. If you can't prove your skills, they don't exist. And that's true, because it's an aspiration, and that's a hope. And you can't prove that, right? You can't prove negative. So, how do you validate your skills using your real life experience? One way, I've already said, is to have a witness on your resume of each skill that you include. So if I say that I have um, like I said, analytical skills, it's somewhere on my resume, probably a lot of places, because my job is to be an analyst. So it's all over my resume. If your job is to be a data analyst specifically, that's going to be all over your resume as well. If you're a social worker, um, you know what skills are required to do your job if you're in it already, and frankly, if you're trying to change into that field, because how are you changing into the field without knowing anything about it? That's not wise. But I digress. Um, so validate your skills on your resume by giving it a witness somewhere on your resume. Okay, number one. Number two, and this is kind of backed up by LinkedIn. So one thing I love about LinkedIn, the system itself, is that when you go to enter a skill, I think you can enter 100 or more now. And that sounds like a lot, but if you've been in your job a while, you probably do have over 100 skills, let's be honest. Um, and they're probably all relevant. So when you enter a skill on LinkedIn, it asks you which job you learned it in. This is important because it does the same thing that I just said. It gives your skill a witness. It allows your LinkedIn profile to say, I have this skill and here's where I got it and how. That's useful because of a few reasons. On your applications, they might ask, particularly if it's a government agency, they might ask, and I don't mean federal necessarily, state, local, what have you. There are lots of levels in government, right? So they might ask, do you have this skill? You say yes, and then immediately it says, where did you get it? This is useful for you because now you can answer that question instead of saying, oh, well, I just have the skill. That doesn't work because if you can't prove it, it does not exist. So using LinkedIn when you enter skills can help you to validate those skills more quickly because it asks you where you got them from. Okay. And then even on LinkedIn, once you say that, you're putting impactful bullets down so that we know how, so that we can validate that that is true. Okay. And then lastly, be prepared to talk about your skills. I believe in talking shop in interviews. And what I mean is, uh, I don't do stuffy interviews. There's no, you ask me a question, I respond. You ask me a question, I respond. We are talking about the nuts and bolts of the work that we do, right? And that's not going to work for somebody who's entry level, most likely, because you don't necessarily know the nuts and bolts. Okay, so unfortunately, I'm not talking to you if that's you. But when you're talking shop, you're able to show skills because you are reading between the lines of what they're asking you. You're asking about their organization and how they operate in that area. And so, even if they don't ask you, do you have X, Y, and Z skill? You've just demonstrated it in your interview because you're asking questions about, you're asking questions that only someone with that skill could ask, right? Hugely important. Please talk shop in your interviews, because if you ask a question, they're not going to say no questions. And if they do, move on. Okay. So skills based hiring might not gain a whole lot of steam lately, but it is still going to exist. And when I say that, it's because there were a lot of federal programs that are not going to exist anymore that were geared towards skills based hiring. And once the federal government does a lot of stuff, a lot of employers then follow suit, as we've all seen, right? So there's not going to be any example from on high of how skills based hiring should work. However, it still exists, right? You still have to have skills because every person that is hired is to an extent hired because of skills, right? Skills based hiring is all hiring. You don't get hired without skills, right? You don't get hired without something that the employer can use. So it's not skills exclusive, but it's also not, it also doesn't ignore your skills, right? So every hire is to an extent based on skills. So with that knowledge, now you think about, oh, what am I doing wrong in that process? How do I bring those skills to the forefront? And I just shared a lot of that with you. There's more, just like I've been in HR for 16 years. There's a lot more to everything I share with you all on here. But I'm talking in like 15 to 30 minutes. So you'd have to talk to me a whole lot longer to know everything about most of these topics. But I just want to give you a snapshot of what those things can look like for you in your job search. And quite frankly, skills-based hiring has been sort of used as a crutch to say, oh, the system is broken. And okay, sure, in some ways it is. But if you're thinking about skills-based hiring any way other than how can I find the skills that the employer is looking for and then present them on a platter, then you're thinking about it wrong. Okay, so I will see you all again on Monday. I don't know the topic yet. We'll think about it. But I hope this was helpful for you all. I hope that you're able to now use it in your job search. And if your resume has orphan skills out there, please give them a friend on your resume. Please give them a home if they're out here by themselves, okay? Because that's what is really most important to employers. All right. See y'all next week. Bye.